I hope you have fun doing your notes.
Hi there, this is Mrs. Meek again, and we're getting ready to talk about cell discovery and theory. All right, so as we have talked about before, cells are the basic unit of life. All right, but we know that we cannot see cells with our naked eye. So because of this reason, it took scientists quite a while to realize what cells even were. All right, so a lot of the cell theory and cell discovery started in the mid 1600s with Robert Hooke, who was one of the first scientists to make a simple microscope to look at a thin slice of cork, and he saw a bunch of little boxes. All right, he thought those little boxes looked like small rooms that the monks lived in. They were called cells, so he named them cells. All right, so you can see over here we have a picture of one of these old microscopes. And at the time, you couldn't just go to the store and buy a microscope. You actually had to create one yourself. All right, around that same time, a Dutch microscope maker was one of the first to see living organisms. And you can see that his little contraption he had over here, his little microscope, looked like a little paddle with a couple of things attached to it. All right, and his name was Anton van Leeuwenhoek. All right, and then not until 1838 did we get a German botanist called Matthias Schleiden that concluded that all plants are made out of cells. All right, so he studied plants, looked at them underneath a microscope, and he determined that every single one of them was made of cells. All right, and then a few years later in 1839, a German zoologist, Theodor Schwann, concluded that all animals are made out of cells. So Schwann and Schleiden worked together and came up with several parts of the cell theory that we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes. And then lastly, in 1855, a German medical doctor, Rudolf Virchow, he was one of the first to see cells dividing in a microscope, and he came up with the very last statement to our cell theory, and that's that cells come from other cells. At this time, people didn't really realize how all living organisms came about. All right, they didn't understand that life can only come from life. They reasoned that some living organisms, like small bacteria and small things that you couldn't see with your eye, could come just spontaneously arise, which sounds crazy to us, but at the time, because they couldn't explain it, that was the best information that science had to offer. All right, so there are three parts of the cell theory, and this is probably the most important information in this PowerPoint. So the first one is that all living things are made of cells. The second piece to the cell theory is that cells are the basic unit of structure and function in an organism. Essentially, this could be summarized by saying cells are the basic units of life. And then lastly, the piece that came about the latest and the one that was debated the heaviest was, where do cells come from? All right, cells must come from the reproduction of existing cells. They do not just spontaneously arrive. All right, so as we are talking about our unit on cells, we are going to do some labs where we're going to look at microscopes. For our classroom, we're going to use a compound microscope that has a series of lenses that allows us to magnify images. So some of the lenses are located up here in the eyepieces and then also in what we call the objectives. All right, so the eyepiece, which are the lenses that you look through at the top of the microscope, times the objective lenses is going to be the amount of total magnification. The maximum amount of magnification without blur is 1,000 times. All right, and that's what that 1000x it means. All right, so we have other microscopes that we don't have access to, unfortunately, but there's electron microscopes that allow us to see much more. For example, some of these transmission electron microscopes, they use magnets to beam electrons at thin slices of cells, and they can magnify them up to 500,000 times. We also have an image down at the bottom here that was created using a scanning electron microscope, And what it does is it coats the object with electrons, and then it produces 3D images. So this is a 3D image of an ant, and you can see its little mouth parts right here. You can see its antenna, some of its legs, all right, and all the little detailed ridges on its body. So the last type of microscope is a scanning tunneling electron microscope that allows us to take 3D images of living organisms. So they use these and some of this electron microscopy imaging when they start taking CAT scans and things of those nature. All right, so when we talk about cell size, this is just giving you a little perspective. Typical cells range from 5 to 50 micrometers, or microns is a short way that we say that. So if you just look at the range here, the human eye can see things in between the size. So the largest egg that there is a frog egg, and we can visualize that that's a single cell. That's the largest single cell, and then you've got the human egg here. All right, so the human eye can see things in these ranges. All right, with our light microscope, we can see quite a bit more, and then with our electron microscope, we can see quite a bit more, all the way down to amino acids and proteins, which we know are some of the macromolecules in our body. All right, just to give you a perspective on this, there are 10,000 microns in 1 centimeter. So that's showing you 1 centimeter or 10 millimeters and 10,000 micrometers or microns. All right, just to give you an idea of how small that is. All right, two different cell types that we're going to talk about here are prokaryotic cells, and then we're going to talk about eukaryotic cells. Pro is the prefix before, karyot refers to cell, so these are some of the earliest cells. So they have no membrane-bound organelles, and they are the first organisms on Earth. They are very, very, very small. They're very hard to see, even with the microscopes that we have. And the example of prokaryotic cells that are still living today, or still around today, are bacterial cells. All right, so all bacterial cells are prokaryotic. All right, almost every other living organism are eukaryotic. So we're going to talk about kingdoms of life sometime soon. So plants, animals, fungi, protists are all eukaryotic cells. The only living organisms that are prokaryote are bacteria. Eukaryotic cells are quite a bit more complex. They have a nucleus. They have membrane-bound organelles. They are much larger, and they're able to typically carry out multiple functions at one time. All right, multicellular organisms don't just contain many cells. All right, they have cells that carry out different types of jobs. All right, so in a multicellular organism, those cells can actually specialize. So when we have cell lines, when you're first developing as an embryo, all right, you get these cells that are referred to as stem cells, and they are the first cells that appear after fertilization occurs. And these stem cells can then start to become specialized into the different kind of cell lines that you need. So this is showing you like a muscle cell. They're showing you a nerve cell. All right, so the different kind of cells that your body needs to carry out all the different functions. All right, so in animals, cells can specialize to muscle cells, red blood cells, cheek cells. In plant cells, all right, they can form into xylem cells, which are cells in the root that help to absorb water. Cells on the leaf, which we have over here, showing you a guard cell that opens and closes to allow oxygen out and carbon dioxide in. And then we also see some of the largest of the plant cells, which is grains of pollen, which is actually the sperm. All right, just to get a perspective of how everything that we've been studying comes together. In our last chapter on biochemistry, we talked about atoms. Atoms make up molecules. Molecules make up organelles, which is going to be one of the next sections that we learn about. Organelles make up cells. Cells make up tissues. So tissues are similar cells that work together. Tissues make up organs. Organs make up organ systems. And lastly, that makes up the organism. All right, so that's it for today. Bring your notes to class tomorrow. See you later. Bye-bye.